Good evening, welcome to African Drums. I'm Elsie Harry and I'm glad that you've joined me this evening. Recently, a pregnant journalist from the state media, Natasha Smith, was made aware that she would be removed from anchoring newscasts, presumably because of her quote-unquote condition. After citizens and members of the Press Association raised their voices in protest, she was allowed to perform her duties. The incident, however, has raised anew the larger question of discrimination against women in the workplace and discrimination against powerless people in the wider society. On today's edition of African Drums, we will discuss this issue with three panelists: women's rights advocate Nicole Cole, youth activist Norwell Hinds, and political commentator Freddie Kissoon. Gentlemen and lady, welcome to African Drums.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so the first thing I want to know, am I correct in framing this issue as one of discrimination against women, one, and powerless people within our society?
Yes, you are correct. I can remember vividly one of the three things I had on the placard that I wanted to drive home the message. Pregnancy is a right, that it was a violation of the Constitution, which is the supreme law, that it was a violation of CEDAW, which is enshrined in Article 29 of the Constitution of Guyana, and that it was also a violation of the Prevention of Discrimination Act. And I'll bring in here tonight that is also a violation of ILO Convention 183, which has enshrined the Maternity Protection Act, Convention of 2000, which is the most recent up-to-date convention that protects maternity rights and the rights of women. It's only women who get pregnant, fortunately. And this is a right that all states must adhere to. And because Guyana is a signatory to CEDAW, Guyana goes in front of a UN CEDAW committee, which we went this year, to answer questions pertaining to the rights and violations against women. Because the CEDAW Convention is clear. It's the convention against the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. CEDAW.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Norwell?
I really don't have much to add to what you said, except to say that I do agree that it is an act against women, because this is a natural phenomenon, pregnancy, and it is indicative, I think, of a kind of thinking that has no place in the modern society. So I think that ultimately what has to be addressed is the fundamentals that safeguard people's rights in a society, and something that is natural shouldn't be legislated against, if you want to use a broader term of legislation, but certainly shouldn't be frowned upon.
Okay, thank you, Noah. Freddie, what is your take on this matter?
Well, my take is not Mr. Cornett and not the incident itself. My take is the morbid regression of this society into a backward age that allows for what happened to Miss Smith and allows for women being turned away in court because they have on an expensive dress without sleeves in it. And I, for the love of me, cannot imagine, as someone trained in philosophy, what is wrong with a woman neatly dressed but without her dress having sleeves that cannot enter a court. The thing about that pregnancy thing is that we seem to lose sight of the framework and the zeitgeist that this country, the bygone zeitgeist that this country has accepted. Everyone picks on Cornett. I saw a letter, he must be dismissed. I myself wrote a column in which I think he should be sanctioned, but I went beyond Cornett. I think Mr. Cornett genuinely and seriously believed that was what his country wanted. That when you had this pregnant lady that is an anchor, this is not Guyana. Guyana is a place where she should be, anchor should be very fair complexion. she should be slim like a model, and she should be like that. This country has regressed so badly that we have gone back to even the worst aspect of colonial aesthetics. I think this is one of the most culturally backward country in the Western Hemisphere. I'm not referring to those Eastern countries that I think are extremely backward when it comes to women and culture. But this is a country where even the police force, the insurance company, the educational system would put an ad in the papers and you would have a Caucasian man and woman in it. Nobody says anything. I see the Guyana Bank for Trade and Industry advertising a loan system, and you have these 12 Caucasian boys and girls with a knapsack. In the photo, I passed by Carifesta Avenue, Everest Sports Ground, and there is this white man with a three-piece suit advertising insurance for hand in hand. This is what this country has come to. If you take if you do some research on anchors, television anchors in this country, a majority of them are fake complexion people. So I think what Cornette, what he did was wrong, but I think Cornette believed he was acting out what Guyana has become. And this is what Guyana has become. We're going to move on to workers' rights, but let me tell you this. Some of the things that I have seen in this country, I'm over 60 years, and I grew up in an era of Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, and what have you, Martin Luther King. That's the era I belong to. And it's not easy psychically living in Guyana when you belong to that era, or when you come from that era. So Miss Smith went vocal, but there are hundreds of Miss Smith in the private sector, in the public sector, that have to endure that. Now, I don't have factual information, so I don't want to make any accusation against McCaw, the foreign company of the East Bank. But I heard that there is a pregnancy problem there with women. I'm not making any accusation against the company. I heard that. I think my source is not wild, and we have to look into it. Those who are looking at this program and who are offended by what happened to Smith need to make some inquiries of Macau.
Okay, thank you, Freddie. I think Nicole had an interjection.
Yes, I wanted to also drive home the point that he didn't only had a problem apparently with her appearance, because remember the instruction is to have the cameraman take tighter shots of her, because he didn't, when he looked at the news, he didn't like what he saw. He also had a problem with her being unmarried. And this is why on Christopher Ram's program, Plain Talk, I made the salient point that Lyndon Forbes Samson Burnham abolished in Guyana the bastard law. No longer are children born out of wedlock deemed bastards. They have entitlement to their father's estate once it can be established credibly that he planted. Once there's credible evidence that he planted, then all those children, whether he made them with 5, 10, 15 or 20 women, if all of them got children for him, all those children have rights.
Let me interject here and say, I wrote a column on this, and I think Guyana was revolted. I honestly don't know that aspect. If that aspect exists, this man has exceeded all legal and philosophical limits. And if that what you're saying is correct, then I think he should be asked to leave. I didn't know that.
Yes,
I thought it was an anti-women move. He should be sanctioned. But for him to get into that lady's business and say you have to work with that to be I can't.
Also, brother, remember he's a pastor.
He's
a man of the cloth.
Nothing in Guyana surprises me. But if what you're saying is factual,
right,
then this program, I can't speak for the other panelists. I myself think that he has no place in
Well, I've called for
21st
him to be fired. I think the Prime
I'm
Minister's
going to call him and ask him if he did that.
Okay,
the
good.
Prime Minister
And-
called for him to be to
apologize.
apologize.
We don't know
was
if that
too weak.
happened. We don't know if that
Was too
happened.
weak. I honestly think that he should be removed simply because of the violation. Here, she was pregnant previously. Nothing happened in 2011. Nothing happened. She's a professional woman. So, are you saying to us that professional women cannot be professional and still have their babies? Is that the message that that you want to send? I just want to read briefly for you what the ILO convention is saying, that maternity is a condition which requires differential treatment to achieve genuine equality. And in this sense, it is more of a premise of the principle of equality than a dispensation. Special maternity protection measures should be taken to enable women to fulfill their maternal role without being marginalized in the labor market. And this is ILO 1996, page 42. So the ILO has set out in their convention, in the Maternity Protection Act of 2000, ILO Convention 183, which Guyana is still to ratify. Cuba has ratified it. Guyana is still lagging behind, that these rights are to be protected. And here I make the call for the operationalization of the Human Rights Commission. It has been budgeted for in the 2016 budget. It should be operationalized henceforth.
Okay, well, I see that this signals a need for so many changes in Guyana. So many things need to take place so that people like Natasha don't have to go through these things.
That's a mild word. So many changes. There is need for a complete transformation of
there
this
we go.
country.
Much better.
Correct, because remember, you had 4 pregnant constables who lost their jobs at City,
Yes, I remember
at City
that.
Hall. It is Mr. Mark Benchcop and I who stood on the picket line and ensured they got their jobs back. That protest took place on the 4th of August 2015.
And
But what
here
is
we are-
sad about this country is the people who made that primitive decision, they're still there. You know? People with this kind of primitive mentality that have no place in post-colonial societies. I'm sure they probably had promotion since then.
Yeah, and what is even more disheartening is that you had a commitment from the government then that they're going to review all policies dealing with pregnancy and women, because it was pointed out that it's a violation. You cannot do it. Women's rights are human rights. I said to them that the Women and Gender Equality Commission has been established to ensure that all these things are carried out. There are 14 mandates that we have, and one of them says promote women's rights as human rights. And so here, her right to give birth is a right. Imagine if someone had said what they said to Mr. Cornett's mom, he would not have been here. Think about it. All the men who are making these laws, what if somebody have done something to their mother? They come from women. And how could you be that callous and inhumane?
Okay, let's hear a bit from Norwell. Norwell, you're a young person. What are youth in the wider society saying about this incident that occurred?
Well, first, I want to agree with Nicole and Freddie in saying that it demonstrates a sort of backwardness that is not just out of place, but it makes a statement about the context that we're operating in right now. I believe, and I thought in 2015, that we had entered into a transformative space within our society, and that the discourse on people's relationship with the state, people's relationship to power, was going to be opened up, and that we would have in that discourse an opportunity to say to the individual that power truly and the power to decide your own fate in this space lies with you, and that you can champion your individual rights in a sense. And I think that is brought into question by this act. It presents for us who looking at the society, hoping that this is a transformative space, it presents for us this challenge that, listen, there is so much to be done still in the mindsets of people, in the relationship between those who have power and those who seemingly don't have power, and what the state is permitted to do, and how does the state sanction those who do things against individuals, against the powerless people. I think that we have to also take the look at gender issues in general and the approach to gender and gender equality. And I think that what this indicates is that there seems to have been, for some reason or the other, a sense that we need to make the society strict, the society got too loose. There seems to be this notion that the society needs discipline, and the conception of this discipline is an archaic colonial conception that discipline will look like this. That has no place, I think, and it has a lot of pushback from young people. I think our understanding of the new society, our understanding of the expectations of the state, fundamentally differ from what was presented here in the case of Ms. Smith. And I think that that young people have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility, to demonstrate to Ms. Smith and to the CEO that those actions were inconsistent with the kind of society and the kind of transformative space that we consider ourselves to be in at this moment. And moreover, to say that we don't need discipline.
Exactly.
What we need is a society that respects the rights of people, that is truly democratic, and a society that is willing to accept that individuals have power, and the power to decide their own society, their own future, their own individual lives.
Okay, thank you, Noah. Let's talk about the wider issue of workers' rights. From reading the news articles, I saw that Ms. Smith was represented by her union representative at one of her meetings with the CEO that she could not attend because she had to go and read the news. Now, I'm glad that Ms. Smith has a union representative, but what about those other workers, for example, in private sector and some in public sector that are not unionized? Who stands up for their rights?
You have made a very you've touched on an issue that is very pervasive. Who stands up for their rights? If they're not unionized and if they are not prepared to stand up for their rights, they are going to be victimized, violated over and over and over again. You have the Women and Gender Equality Commission. I mean, persons are encouraged to make complaints. I've heard of complaints of women being sent off from their jobs because they're pregnant. If you ask them if they're willing to come forward now to give us a statement, this is where fear stalks this land. And let us not fool ourselves. It's a real and present danger, fear. So if you fear that I will be penalized or I will be victimized for standing up for my rights, then you are going to back off and allow that victimization to continue and allow it to continue to happen. And so as acts become more emboldened, you think it's the norm until you have the pushback that Norwell has so eloquently spoken about. Then you will have persons saying, we have to change this behavior, we have to change this type of thinking. I got into a conversation with someone who tried to tell me that Ms. Smith's right wasn't being violated and she wasn't being discriminated against, and we mustn't worry about international conventions. And I saying, what? We must worry about it, because once we sign on to it, we have questions to answer at the UN CEDAW committee. And if you want to be seen as a state that is not draconian, that is not primitive, and you're into contemporary and modern society, then you must ensure that these rights are there and it is being protected. And here is where you need to have labor officers, a robust your Ministry of Labor, Social Protection, or the Department of Labor, being on the ball and ensuring that workers are informed of their rights. If you don't know your rights, how will you know it's being violated? So education plays a key part, a key component in workers even knowing that their rights are being violated. You have cases whereby a company will advertise for one job specification, but when the person get the job, they become the janitor, they become the accountant, they become the they do all these other different descriptions, and they are told that if they don't do it, this will happen. And again, fear makes person comply because they fear of losing the work. Fear.
I want to add a dimension besides fear to it. You know, Freddie is a social commentator, but I want to offer some observation also on the social thing. It seems as if that we have emerged into a society, I call it the hustler mentality. We've become a hustler society. I call it also, I don't want to sound political on the program, but I call it the Jack Dio phenomenon. Alright?
The Jack Dio phenomenon.
The Jack Dio phenomenon.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you...
We gotta be the Jack Dio infamy. No, not phenomenon, right?
So, phenomenon.
Okay.
I know, so we not be political.
The Jack Dio notoriety.
Oh, okay.
What happened is that somewhere around 2007 onwards, the society became a society that was dominated by the pursuit of money by any means, and that the society took on an almost violent as violence to people who were poor. In those who had money wanted more money and wanted to do anything to get money, and it meant eliminating people, the rights of people who were working for them, and we see examples of it. There are tons of examples. There's the example of the woman or man who works at the fish shop, any fish shop, or any of those nighttime bars, and the boss got how many different women, and sometimes he take out money and he can't remember how much he take out, and then she got it paid back at the end of the night. Those things happen when the owners of the business take out money. They come to the cashier, they just take money, but then you have to tally at the end of the night, you're responsible. It happens when people are working for $800 a day. $800 a day. I was shocked. I was in Linden, I was eating a nice meal, and I just said, how much you make this a nice food, you cook this food and so. She said, I ain't cook the food and so on. She said she works at $800 a day. $800 a day. It happens on Regent Street, on those stores. And people who are brought on as sales clerk is also people who work in security. They're working as cleaners. They doing this, they're doing that, doing personal favors, sometimes sexual favors for the bosses to keep their jobs.
Oh yeah.
So there's a violence against poor people in this country, and a sort of inhumanity in the pursuit of money, and I think that this is something that we have not been talking about a lot. How people have been approaching this pursuit of money. They've been, people taking advantage of, sexual advantage, and all those different things. And we have to, I think, begin to discuss that we not only live in a framework with this neoliberalist and this capitalist mode, but we also live in a society in which there aren't measures for people to get some relief and to represent their own interests in relation to how they're treated at their workplaces, and to say that this is what is treated to, this is my treatment by my employer, and they get some sort of justice in the system. I think the large issue here is that there's no justice when these things happen to you.
Correct. Right now, Freddie's fighting for justice.
Well, Elsie, Harry, I don't think I'm the right person in a 1 hour program for you to ask to talk about workers' rights, absence of violations. I'm going to take a whole program.
You've done it to Vincent before.
Well, Vincent did it to me. What I would suggest to you that will change your life forever is to spend some time with me and my wife, and spend some time with me out in the streets. From the time I left, you're in the car with me, we go to the supermarket, and the things you would hear, people come to my gate. This is one of the most disrespectful lands in the world when it comes to the poor and powerless. People have no rights.
Oh, yeah.
People die on the workplace. People die in the workplace, and when their children, their spouse go to that employer, they can't see the guard at the gate, so they're not there. I can give you hundreds of cases like that. People working for some of the big local companies, big family names, drowned while working, not a cent. Let me take up from where Norwell left off. Norwell said after a period of time, the society became dominated by the ideology of money, and it bred violence. I think it goes back in a minute way to Mr. Hoyt's presidency and the introduction of neoliberal economics and this thing about the ERP. You see, neoliberal economics has no role for the state. And once you miniaturize the state, there is no protection, because historically after the dismemberment of the Roman Empire, the state grew as a protector of nationalist rights, and the state evolved over the past 1,000 years as the protector of the society, and by extension protection of rights. And it became even more so after the abolition of slavery, and then the abolition of colonialism. So what happened is people looked to the state, but most importantly the poor and powerless. What neoliberalism has done from Mr. Jagdeo, beginning without passing through the PPP, but viciously under Mr. Jagdeo, is that the state had no role to play in the direction of where the society was going. Money did that. The nouveau riche took over and took over the state. What happened then is, when the state became demoralized, and when its protective canopy, right, flew down on the ground, people became demoralized. This naked, ubiquitous fail that we have in Guyana, where women are raped, people are underpaid, and they are afraid. I can tell you guys the kind of complaints I get. And you say to them, well, yes, I'm going to go with it, but Mr. Kissoon, don't mention money. Don't mention money.
Fair, yeah.
My column tomorrow is about a man not being paid $1.9 million from Carifesta. So he came up to me and said, they're paying BK to why Mr. Kissoon owe me $1.9 million. I said, I'm going to do a whole column on you. Will you go public? He hem and ha, and then I said, look, you have to go public. You have to let me name your business. Let me name you. And that has happened in my column tomorrow. So yes, Norwell had it right. Money replaced philosophical moral values, and concomitant with the domination and hegemony of money was a lack of humanity. And the only avenue to resuscitate the society was demoralize the state. And we have today a state that is still in that kind of mode. Now, we don't have Jagdeoism, but the culture that Jagdeo, the phenomenon, is still there. I mean, you take, for example, you know, you guys are pretty young. I come from an age where you dismiss 53 workers because they were going on strike. You know what would have happened to Guyana? Rousseau dismissed 53 workers, and our ministers go and discuss with the violators policies and development without mentioning
the violation,
the workers' rights. I mean, a guy comes out of his office named Royston King, walks up the road, see he doesn't like 100 people selling, and by extension 100 people means about 500 because they have families. I don't want them selling here. Men and women picking up their basket and running. This is what this society has become, you know.
Well, let me ask you something, Freddie. Have we become a Hobbesian state where life has become nasty, brutish and short? I read your column. In this country, human drop like flies, where you alluded to what happened to the guy behind the airport here and how he died. And I have been a fan of Thomas Hobbes, and his thesis has to do with a Hobbesian state develops when you have chaos. The state, as he said, it has been usurped. The role has been usurped, taken over by money. So now what you have is total chaos, and life within the state has become nasty, brutish and short. Do you think we have become, we became that, and have we begun to transform out of that, or are we still there?
If I answer that question, it will take some time, and I'll cut off Norwell, and I don't want to do to Norwell what Vincent Alexander did to me,
because you
but there are some redemptive features in Hobbes that people don't know about. We don't have that redemptive features in Guyana. But if I answer that, I will take some time. So let Norwell come in, because On this program, I'm a regular guest, and people dominate me. So I don't,
So you
I don't
just
want to
want to
dominate
others.
But are we a Hobbesian state? Did
I
we
think
become like that?
we are a Hobbesian state without the redemptive feature of Hobbes. You see what Hobbes did? In the chaos, Hobbes invented something called the Leviathan.
Right.
That's the
Yes.
name of his book, the Leviathan. Now, the Leviathan, like Plato's philosopher king, the Leviathan takes your right away and put it in himself. But the Leviathan makes sure that only he can tamper with your rights. So the Leviathan protects you, although you don't have an equal relation with the Leviathan. The Leviathan is absent in Guyana. The Leviathan has been replaced by the nouveau riche, by money, and by a criminalized state. So the Leviathan, we have a Hobbesian state without the Leviathan. The last resort is the Leviathan, and he descends into the arena when things become chaotic, and he brings order, or she brings order. But
we
there's
don't
no
have that.
Leviathan. So you're right, we have a Hobbesian state without the Leviathan. I'm behaving like Vincent Alexander.
You did that in a short space of time.
I think you did it.
Thank you. I
Education
think
for
you
me.
did an
Yes.
excellent
It's
job.
education
And
for me.
education for the
I'm
audience
sure for the
as
audience,
well.
and I think we appreciated it. I think that the question has to be, how do we begin to, I don't think that I want the Leviathan type of redeeming, but I think that we have to discuss how do we bring some redeeming qualities back to the society.
But not only
And
that.
your specific question was about the union and
Yes.
the role of the union.
Right.
Yes.
And you know, in not just in Guyana, but it seems to be fair to say that in many societies across the Caribbean, that trade unionism seems to be going out of fashion, and this is something we have to discuss. I don't have an answer for it, but certainly we do need to recognize that those who have the responsibility now, in the case of those who have control of the state, have the authority to step in and to act in some regards as a Leviathan. I don't know if we want to use the term, but certainly we need to see people do things on behalf of the powerless from the level of the state, from the level of ministers. There was a minister who was doing a lot, but I guess they said that she was doing too much and she was moved to another ministry, Simone Brooms.
Yes.
But we need to see activist ministers who are willing to step out of their comfort zone and step into the society and to represent people. I would hope also that we see a resuscitation of trade unionism, and that the trade union is redeemed, to use Freddie's term, because I think that the trade union movements in Guyana have become themselves chaotic, and they pose their own problems. Those same trade unions have also served to enrich some, and they have served to create a certain elite group within itself. So I think that those conversations, that conversation also needs to happen in terms of redeeming the society.
I think the Leviathan here can be the operationalization of the Human Rights Commission. It has been a commission that is supposed to be operationalized ever since. We have the Indigenous Peoples Commission, we have the Rights of the Child Commission, where I sit, we have the Women and Gender Equality Commission, where I also sit. But overarching all of that should be your Human Rights Commission.
No, but it's a flawed body, because those commission you call, they go into the Human Rights Commission, the head of each one of them. So it's not where you have an independent body and I pick Elsie, I pick Norwell, and that
Persons
is the
who are
Human Rights
neutral.
Commission. The people from those commissions you call, the head has
The
to come
chairs.
from one,
Right.
has to come from one of them. That is where the flaw is. You should have a Human Rights Commission in which we look at, this is a real good lawyer when he was young.
Right.
The man gave his life for clients who were brutalized.
Correct.
Let's make him the Human Rights Commission chairman.
Correct.
No, the law doesn't operate that way. So you may very well have the chairman of the Human Rights Commission coming from the Women and Gender Commission, who is a PPP leader, Ms. Inja Chanjapal. So that's the problem with the law. The law is flawed. It's like the Ethnic Relations Commission. The Ethnic Relations Commission is actually a misname, because you could have an Ethnic Relations Commission with only one ethnic group, which happened 7 years ago, because the representative from the Muslim was an Indian. The representative from the Christian was an Indian. The representative from the Hindu was an Indian. The representative from the private sector was an Indian.
So what you had was
and
hegemony.
what made it
You had
worse?
hegemony.
You didn't have other ethnic representation, and then the TUC put an Indian in the form of me to be on that.
So you had hegemony. What you had
So
was hegemony.
you had Indian hegemony plus me.
Plus you. But I think this is characteristic of the wider problem that we have in Guyanese society, where everything is just swept with a broad brush.
Yeah.
What I find is that Guyana, we were leading the way for so many years within Caribbean society, because I grew up in St. Kitts. But when I would say that I'm Guyanese in
were born
St.
there?
Kitts, no, I grew up there.
Oh.
But when I would say that I'm from Guyana to somebody in St. Kitts, somebody older, they would say, oh, you know, Forrest Burnham, he did this person, he did that. Oh, you Guyanese people don't play. Anybody do you anything, you come out and you protest in the streets, you strike, you do this, you do whatever. And then when I moved back to Guyana, I was like, well,
You
am
don't
I in
see
a
that.
different place? So Guyana would have been leading the way in the earlier time, but what happened to
They
Guyana now?
retrogressed, and based on what Norwell told you what happened, and Freddie also told you, in that retrogression, what took place, the culture of the get rich quick or die trying syndrome, whereby money at any cost, money drive the force, money was the driving force, and money still is the driving force, and we know that is the driving force because the coalition government took a salary increase within 6 weeks in our face. We know it's a driving force. They showed us the
That
way.
was a very terrible.
They showed us the way.
That was one.
We
of
have
the
to
most
talk about that on another program.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
final issue I want to discuss before we before the program ends is, well, in the same vein of workers' rights, Joselle Archibald Hawk was another young lady, a sports editor, that was sent on suspension without pay for the comment that she made on her personal Facebook page saying that she's surrounded by idiots.
Yeah.
What do we think about that?
I think I called it economic violence. I still believe it's economic violence. Economic violence is the most pervasive form of violence that women experience. That's why you have such a plethora of single-parent moms. It's economic violence being perpetrated right there, when fathers will disappear and leave offspring on women, and women have to pick up the slack. So here, you said to her that she violated her privacy. She shouldn't have embarrassed her colleague. You said to her you wanted an apology, written one. She wrote it. You deemed it sarcastic. You deem it unacceptable by whatever formula. Then you're gonna suspend her and then take away her pay. Triple times. This coming from a CEO who found himself in hot water and get a second chance, you know. This coming from a man who's supposed to know that the Bible says that we must forgive how much? 70 times 7. And so here you have, even though His Excellency has called it inhumane, nothing has happened. It's like if the president didn't even talk. Right? So she still remains on suspension. I think the latest article we saw is her saying it is hard. I know that Mark Benchcap, God bless him, has gotten together and do like a little crowd funding, and he has pledged to give her some monies, basically. But when you have that again happening in this day and age, it just goes to show that we have a culture of patriarchy, and patriarchy culture is that brutal towards women, very brutal and inhumane, cruel. So here it is playing out right there in front of your eyes for you to see. And if you want to wonder if we have a culture of patriarchy, the two most powerful people in this land are males. His Excellency and the Prime Minister. I thank you.
I want to respond in two streams though. One, I do want to address the issue because it came up in the conversation about the notion of privacy in a public space, in a public virtual space. I don't think it is true to say, and it's a debate, but in a modern society, we get callous about what we do in the virtual space, but we don't recognize that that virtual space is a public space. You could make it a private space, and there are measures to do so, but in that sense it was not a private act. It was an act that was done in a public space, and we have not worked out the ethics of actions in a virtual public space, and I think that is a problematic in itself. So that's aside, but that does not have any impact, or should not have an impact, on the right of an individual to express themselves how they see fit to express themselves in a public space, virtual or not. And I think that the deeper issue is that this woman was sanctioned for her right to express herself the way she felt she wanted to express herself. She made no threat against the person. She did not engage in any form of violence against the individual. I personally thought that he asked a good question. I actually thought so. I thought the question was really good. It was a modern, hip question to ask. But, it was her right to have that view. And I think that again, we see the demonstration of sort of this backwardness and this overreach of the powerful, who believe that they can reach into the spaces of people, virtual or otherwise, and dictate to them how they must operate in those spaces. And I think that is unacceptable. I also think that in how she was treated, we have not established in a society from a critical, I think, from a, it's just about, it's I would say critical thinking even. You have to establish a forum where where things are addressed in a methodological way. There's a method, there is an organized way, that there is a formula, that there are rules. And I think that we have become so lawless that what used to be in a previous time considered normal, but really in fact abnormal, has carried itself over into this, what I call a transformative space. Because I still believe that we have the responsibility to insist that this is a transformative space and insist on the transformation. And I think that has carried itself into this space, and it is not it is a sort of backwardness that we're seeing exhibited here once again. And I think that it is something that we have to push back against.
Let us call it what it is. It's abuse of power.
Yeah.
We must call it by what it is. It's abuse of power. It is something that is a culture in Guyana to abuse power. And Freddie knows that very well. It's abuse of power. That's what he did. He could have left it at the apology. Here it is, the Prime Minister coming to tell him that he must apologize to Ms. Smith. Should she now deem his apology not genuine?
It's more than abuse of power. It's the pathological descent into morbid fear. Now, we are discussing the media and what happened. The last time I was on this program, we were discussing the media and what happened with Chronicle.
Yes.
And then when I called my friends who are on the Chronicle board and said they should act it better, my friend Bart Wilkinson said, "But Freddie, you should have given me a call in the comedy studio." But isn't it the same thing that we're witnessing?
Yes.
There is a board, and when you look at that board, it consists of people like the same people we had at the Chronicle, who before the election in 2015 would denounce things that are happening. Where is the board? Where are those people? Now, this woman did not do anything at NCN.
No.
She did something on her Facebook. For me, I believe that's the right to express yourself and the right to wear what clothes you want. Next thing you're gonna, that guy at NCN gonna tell you what color he prefer. So if you go with a purple shirt, you may get dismissed. But where is the board? And what is happening in this country that is de-animating and de-galvanizing and demoralizing the youth is that they expect this post-15 leadership to embark in the direction of freedom. The Chinese have a saying, "Let a billion flowers bloom." And I think these young people believe that a billion flowers would bloom after this grand coalition of Nagamutu and this decent guy Granger. Now they should have stepped in there. The board should have stepped in and said, "Cornet, what are you doing? This is not a Jack the White government." It's the same thing with the Chronicle. The Chronicle, David Hinds' columns were not published. We had the thing here.
Censorship.
The guy didn't turn up. for the thing, and
Yes.
life goes on. So there's going to be a Smith tomorrow, and there's going to be somebody else tomorrow. This country will change. It's going to take hard, long, revolutionary impetus, but it honestly depends on the two of you, the one to my left and you on my right. It
So will
depends on young
it take
people
the
like
next
you.
50 years?
You have to ask the young people. I must say, I know both of them, and they're in the forefront of change. So it has to be them.
But for me, this is symbolic of the issue of Guyana, well, being outdated and archaic, but also a lot of the people that we have making policy for Guyana are old. Plain and simple, they're old. So where it comes to social media policies in the workplace, non-existent.
Good, and this is why it's even more absurd that you punish her for a non-existent.
Exactly.
What type of formula was used? Pythagoras? You tell me. To come up with that. What formula did you use? Because you have no policy. So your punishment is null and void because you have no policy to point to show that she violated this, she violated and she violated that. This is why it's abuse of power.
Okay, so, we have a few more minutes left. So the final thing I want to hear from you, my good folk on this panel. What do we do? What is the way forward? How do we ensure that things like these don't keep happening in Guyana?
I think the way forward is struggle, and that is what has brought the abolition of slavery. That is what has brought the abolition of colonialism. That is what has brought freedom to African Americans. Martin Luther King struggled. Our foreparents struggled for the abolition of indentureship and what have you. And we have to keep struggling. Norwell, I know you guys in Cuffy250, you're in other organizations, and this program itself is a form of struggle. Think if you didn't have this program, there are thousands of people watching there. They're going to discuss it in the workplace tomorrow. People who belong to the PNC and the WPA are going to say, listen man, when we meet our leader, we're going to talk to them. I think you have to struggle. Guyana, it is about struggle. Norwell did say that there is a lessening of trade union rights in the Caribbean. It's worth saying, because some of the post-colonial, anti-colonial structures and the passion that go with it, particularly in Jamaica, are still there. But we went through a phase that the Caribbean has not gone through. The criminalized state, the worship of money. Right. So this trade union rights, an academic in Jamaica, trust me, is still a revered person, an admired person. People scorn academics here. So we have gone through bad times, and the struggle will be more intense here, but we have to struggle.
Thanks, Freddie. Nicole.
I'd like to say that we must continue to protest, and that is a form of struggle. We also must continue to educate.
Yes.
Because without education, how will persons know that their rights are actually being violated? And that is exactly what I sought to do in standing out there with the Guyana Press Association, other persons, is to have a placard to educate you that pregnancy is a right and all the violations that are there that is being violated. So we have to continue to protest and to struggle. The Women and Gender Equality Commission exists to make sure that women's rights are respected as human rights. And this is why I was out there saying exactly that it's a violation. You have done this, you have done that, because you are violating your supreme law, the Constitution, Article 29, right there and then, which has enshrined CEDAW. And there's no if, but, or maybe. Women's rights are human rights. So we have to ensure that they know when they're violating it. And so we must keep the government feet to the fire and do so without fear or favor, affection or ill will, because that's the oath of office I took in 2009, to serve without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So when I come out to speak on the issues, I'm speaking to the issues because you've done a violation and you've got to accept it and correct it.
Thank you, Nicole. Norwell.
I think that I agree. We do have to struggle and protest, and I would remind that struggle and protest does exist within a spatial context as well as a temporal context. It exists within where we live, our spaces, where we operate, but also the time in which we operate. And I always reflect upon a conversation with Andai, talking about an undyed famous WPA and gender rights activist in this country, and she made an important statement that I would always reflect upon. She said that in her time, and time I think that Freddie refers to and so on, in that immediate period, post-colonial period, and in the struggles that led up to the abolition of colonialism, people believed that big things were possible. There was a belief in big change. There was a belief that the struggle we were engaged in and the protest that we were engaged in was to break down ideology and structures completely and to create a new society. And largely, I don't know that we still believe that big change is possible. It is also true that we exist in a moment where, and especially for young people and people like myself, I grew up in youth work where the thing used to be, the statement was, you need to think global and act local. So you always think, and again spatial, you're thinking in this global space and disconnected from your local reality and context, and how it is that your activism, your scholarship and so on has to be applied to the local space, to the space in which you live. And I think that we have to come back to a notion of think local and act local. That you localize your scholarship, that you localize your activism, that you localize your protests, localize your struggle. That you operate in a time that is modern and that is virtual and electronic and social media and so on. But you still have a responsibility to operate within the space and the context in which you live. And I think that that is something that we have to do, that we have to do more of. So, in short, and at the end of the program, but what needs to be done, how do we move forward? I think that we have to continue to do and continue to press. I believe, and I'm beginning to believe that I might be the only one who believes that we are in a transformative space. That that there is, Freddie has identified he's a self-confessed pessimist. I, in this context, am an optimist. I believe that we have an opportunity, if we press hard enough, we have an opportunity to create some fundamental changes. It will not be revolutionary. The society is neoliberal and the state is still self-interested. But we do have the opportunity to create some fundamental and lasting changes in this particular moment that we exist in. I think that we have to continue to press hard for that.
Especially since we voted for quote-unquote
change.
It
is time.
You know how I vote.
It is time.
Well, the majority, because they did win the election.
Okay. Well, you said
so
we. So
thank you.
I know. I voted for change.
It is time.
There you go.
It is time.
All right.
I voted for Apnu plus AFC. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you guys for being on African Drums. I would definitely love to have you guys on again for other discussions on the same.
Well, you normally have me on.
Yeah,
Other people dominate.
Remember that one time it was just me and you alone when that other person didn't show up, where you had the
How much
hour
other
for
person?
yourself.
You invited Will Johnson to this and he didn't come because he now works with the government. I am not going to spare Johnson.
Okay, that's the end of the program. Thank you guys for being on African Drums.
Thank you.
Viewers, thank you for staying with me, and I just want to encourage you, all of the workers, to advocate for certain things in your workplace. For example, ethics. What are the codes of conduct that you are being held to? Because when you get suspended, you must ask your employer, okay, on what grounds am I being suspended? On what grounds am I being dismissed? And if those grounds are not in line with what you would have agreed to as a worker, then you have some form of recourse. You can find Freddie, you can find Nicole, you can find Norwell, you can find me, definitely, and we will be willing and able to advocate for you. I just want to say hello to Stefan and Benjamin. I hope you guys are tuned in to African Drums, and I want to remind you to please like our Facebook page. It's Cuffy250. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel Cuffy250 for videos of the show. Send us an email cuffy250gy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, and please donate to the cause. I'm Elsie Harry, and this has been African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. Please join me next time.